Hey, Kate here with Wild Sacred Journey and another creature comfort video. So these are videos to inspire and awaken and give context and comfort to, our creature selves, particularly when we're on a journey of kind of unplugging from trying to live like a machine and coming back to a more animist, ancestral, creaturely way of being in the world and like with ourselves and with each other. So I'll talk today for this moment about kind of like two things that I'm sort of seeing a lot in what I would call the spirituality and wellness spaces, or the intuitive development spaces, the empath spaces. And they're kind of like two concepts that come through a lot, and yet they're also two concepts that I think if we're not careful, our sort of internalized empire can really affect our understanding of them and how we engage with them. So the first that I would talk about would be this idea of like downloads, right? Or transmissions, or kind of tuning in. So I think a lot of times when we start to engage with that kind of thing, and I've even sort of been guilty of like using the metaphor of kind of like tuning to a different radio channel, right? Because that's something we all kind of get. And it is true that these things are happening on different frequencies. So when it comes to sort of starting to shift to a different perception channel, right? From our like purely physical senses, maybe into our subtle senses, our, sort of beyond physical senses, there's a sense that it's like we're changing the dial, right? And that works if we're kind of talking about that more internally as like an action that we're taking to kind of shift our internal orientation in some way that then we can receive something different. We're not just opening our physical senses to the environment around us, but we're also opening our subtle senses to be able to receive different communications, information, whatever, from the subtle realms and whatever subtle beings might be there. But where sort of the internalized empire can kind of start to get tricky is when we start to tune into, whether we want to call it the holy or spirit or the other world, or these ancestral wisdom traditions and these lineages, and we tune into them and we assume that they're kind of like this broadcast that's just happening, and we tap in and we get something from it, and then we tap back out again, And it's really easy to kind of just fall into the trap of doing that, because tapping into those spaces, man, it can feel really beautiful, right? It's like it shifts us internally in some kind of way that gets us in a more expansive, more loving or compassionate, like softer kind of place. And that's really amazing in a lot of ways. But then it, again, with our sort of this human-centric worldview that we've all kind of been, immersed in growing up, and that we've all kind of internalized, and without an animist framework that tells us that these things are not resources to tap into, that these are actually beings. Even a lineage is a consciousness, like a wisdom lineage is a consciousness, right? So whatever it is that we're receiving beyond physical information from, right? Like that we're receiving downloads or transmissions from, these are not just broadcasts that we tune in and we get the thing and we feel good and then we tune back out again, right? These are relationships that actually need to be cultivated. These are actually beings that we can either get in relationship with or not get in relationship with. And if we're just constantly, if you think about it, like if it were a friend, if you're constantly taking and never giving back, eventually that well might start to dry up, right? It might get harder for us to connect, or it might get harder to kind of receive the kind of things that we're hoping to get from it. So that's one piece. And then the other piece I wanted to talk about was the idea of growth. And so there's this idea that when we start to develop our intuition, when we start to connect with more of our ancestral wisdom lineages, when we start to deepen on this sort of journey of not just tuning into the world as the physical world, but as also, again, the beyond physical world. There's kind of this pressure in these spirituality and wellness spaces, in these developmental spaces, to like expand, that all growth is expansion, right? And so that too is a very empire and honestly very kind of capitalistic idea, right? Just constant growth, constant expansion. It's all linear. We're moving in one direction. Sorry, I had to pause. There was this dog that walked past that always loves to just stare at me. So anyway, we had to have our little moment. So there's this idea, empire sort of, and capitalism in particular, revolve around this idea that all growth is linear and it's forward moving and it's expansive, right? But that's not the way the natural world works. The natural world moves in cycles, and it's much more understanding that there's limitations, there's finite resources, right? And there's retrograde periods, right? There's growth sometimes looks like moving backwards first and then to move forward again. So why speak about these two things, and kind of where do I see them as bridging? So when we go to a training or a summit or a festival or a plant medicine ceremony or a really deep, expansive sound bath or yoga class or whatever the thing is, right? Like a ceremony of some kind. When we go to these peak experiences, these expansive spaces, the beauty of that is it takes us out of our ordinary selves, right? It takes us out of purely the mundane physical world. It puts us off, if it's done well, it puts us deeply in contact with these transmissions, with these sort of otherworldly beings and presences and consciousnesses and wisdom lineages. And it helps us expand what we understand to be possible in ourselves, in our senses, right? And so if we are not looking, if we're still making the mistake of thinking that those are resources that we're tapping into and that then we just feel good and leave, if we're still operating from the sense that growth is expansion and there's no other kind of growth, then what ends up happening is we end up in these dynamics where it almost becomes like an addiction. I'm not saying it is, but there's a little bit more of this like dependency because we want to feel something, so we go somewhere and we get the hit, right? And then we come back home and that hit lasts us for a while, we ride it for a while, and then we kind of like crash back down, and then we have to go back out again and get the next hit, right? And that keeps us kind of in this pendulum, right? Of like, I'm here and I want to be here, so I go here and I get that, and eventually I swing back to here, so then I go back, right? And we have to kind of keep doing that. And maybe the pendulum gets more and more extreme because it takes more for us to kind of feel the things that we're used to feeling. Because again, eventually, if we're not giving back, if we're not entering into a relationship, if we're not allowing ourselves to be changed, right? Any real relationship we enter into will change us in some kind of way. It will move us and change us. If we're not allowing ourselves to be changed in some kind of way by the encounter, by the relationship, then eventually it will kind of stop giving us what we're looking for. And, that's just kind of how it is. So what's the antidote? So the antidote then is, instead of this linear trajectory, is that we have to come back to spirals, right? Spirals are these deeply, deeply ancestral understandings of how life works. And the spirals, they go wide and they go deep, right? Or they go surface level or deep. They go wide, they go intimate, they go forward, they go back, right? They move in all these multi-dimensional ways. And they circle back, but not always to the same place, right? So there's room for this understanding that growth and expansion are one part of it, but they're one part of the journey, but that that there's also these other ways, right? And that, yes, maybe we go back to the same places, but that we want to be maybe arriving at a different layer, or, you know, going back to a same place, but from a different perspective or in a different relationship to it, you know, if that makes sense. So you could also think of it like a plant, right? You put down roots and then grow some leaves, and then the leaves need more nourishment from the soil, so the roots grow wider, and then the roots want more nourishment from the sun, so the leaves grow wider, right? And there's this growth happening down and growth happening up at the same time. So this is what I submit the role of integration is, right? Is integration is recognizing that when we go to these peak experiences, when we go to these big expansive spaces, we're meant to then take whatever we've encountered there and allow ourselves to be changed by it in some way. It's the chewing and the digesting and the metabolizing of the experience, so that, like, on a cellular level, we somehow become different because of it. And we are somehow touched and changed by our relationship with the holy, with spirit, with the other world, you know, with this subtle world, with the, you know, that sort of exists right alongside, you know, this material one. So yeah. And so that means then that growth can't just be about expansion. Growth has to also be the digestive process. Growth has to also be the being changed by it, which is a much more internal and kind of more where the root growth might come in, you know? So if we go back to that plant image, you know, the expansive experience is the leaves growing, right? And then we need to, like, take that and funnel some of that back into our roots and expand our roots to be able to hold that. So that's when I talk about grounding the charge, and that's a workshop I have coming up March 21st, 2026, although the recording will be available for sale afterwards. So if you're finding this video later and this is really speaking to you, you know, don't worry, you haven't missed out. And I'm offering this workshop, in conjunction with Oracle Fest, through Oracle Fest. In part because Kate Graham, my friend and the founder of Oracle Fest, and I both kind of look at sort of this awakening your inner oracle, the importance of helping people connect to the beyond physical world, to the subtle world that exists alongside this one, because there's a whole experience of life that we miss out on. There's a whole level of guidance and wisdom for our times, for our future, you know, that comes from the past as well as maybe even from the future. You know, at the level of energy, time and space aren't linear. So we have this sort of like outside of linear time wisdom that can start to come through for us in these times if more people have access to these beyond physical senses. So that's kind of the premise that we're both coming from in some way, in our own ways. That's my wording for it, not exactly hers. I'm not speaking for her. But, you know, I'm helping people live as creatures, not machines. You know, Oracle Fest is kind of here to help people tune into their inner oracle. And there's a lot of overlap here, because coming back to this more animist and ancestral understanding of how to navigate these peak experience spaces, how to navigate the awakening of our sensitivities, how to navigate our relationship with the other world. You know, that is what animist and ancestral technologies and wisdom lineages were aiming to help people do in their own ways. So yeah, so there's a beautiful bridge here, and so through that bridge, we're offering grounding the charge, and particularly because Oracle Fest, you know, has big Oracle Fest every late January, early February, and that's such a peak experience, you know. And so we were kind of talking about it one day, and like, right, so everybody has these big expansive moments, and they get these insights and these ahas and these downloads, and then we kind of send them out into the world, right? And it's not just Oracle Fest. This is so many things that happen in the spirituality and wellness space. And so, you know, anybody can kind of break people open a bit. It's a lot easier to break things than to put them back together again. We see that everywhere in the world. So it's easier to kind of crack open our perceptions and help us get to kind of see this other stuff. But to then have us know what to do with it so that it becomes something, it becomes medicine. It becomes something of use, like to us and to the world. So it becomes a relationship that we can tend and we can actually steward in a good way. That requires a different set of skills than just these skills of constant expansion. And these are the skills that are often undervalued. These are the skills that often aren't taught as much. But that's what we'll be starting to cover in this Grounding the Charge workshop, which will be taking the charge, which is whatever big opening, whatever experience. It could also be the charge of the world, right? There's different types of charge. There's charge that feels quote unquote good and charge that feels quote unquote bad, right? So, but it'll be looking at how can we sort of take these, navigate a world of different types of charge from this place of being able to expand when that's time, and then knowing how to ground that so that we can stabilize it, so that we can, be in good relationship with it. And so, if that speaks to you, if that feels like something that you're like, oh, that's the missing piece, then I'd love for you to join us live, or, like I said, the recording should still remain available for sale, so you can catch that. And in the meantime, let me know if you have any questions. And otherwise, I hope this supports you in some way, whether you're able to join us or not. But I would love to see you on March 21st if you can make it, and if this feels like this is a big piece for you, to help you get access to the recording, I've got the link below. So thank you.